Christian, thank you so much for joining us here. One of the big roles of lieutenant governor and, vice presidential candidates, anyone who's running for running mate, I think is always to bring something to the ticket that the main candidate does not bring to the ticket. What do you think you're bringing to this campaign that makes JB Pritzker a stronger candidate?
At the end of the day, I think that the number one goal is being able to, one, step into the role if anything happens, and two, to really support the candidate and the candidate's vision. JB Pritzker and I view the world the same way. We care deeply about working families, deeply about the middle class, deeply about the most vulnerable in Illinois, about making sure we continue to win the race for the jobs of the future all across the state, from Chicago to Belvedere to Alton. To Cairo down, where we've reinvested in the Cairo port through the large infrastructure plan that I was able to help steer when I was his deputy governor. We're going to keep doing that. And ultimately, I think bringing somebody who will continue to do the work, who will, with the governor, go everywhere in the state of Illinois, advocating for the state of Illinois. That's the thing I think I bring to the ticket. And I think we think about the state the same way.
Yeah, you've held a lot of roles in your career. You're very experienced in state government. One thing that the governor has said over the last week that he was looking for is someone who can immediately step into the role of governor if required. Tell me why you're ready to fill that role if needed.
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, JB Pritzker is running to be governor. I'm running to be lieutenant governor. As he said the other day, he's in pretty good health. So odds are those are the exact roles that we are going to keep. But at the end of the day, I was fortunate as deputy governor to oversee several of our largest agencies: transportation, emergency management, the Department of Military Affairs, which works for the Illinois National Guard. I also was able to get very large things done in the legislature. The $45 billion infrastructure plan that repaired roads and bridges across northern, central, and southern Illinois, as well as the Climate Equitable Jobs Act to put us on a path to 100% clean and renewable energy. So I think I have legislative experience, executive branch, and management experience that's going to allow me to be helpful to the governor on day one and ready for the challenge ahead of us.
I think one reason that a lot of people have just focused on the governor talking about that is just that kind of open rumor that he might be interested in running for president in 2028. You've worked with him very closely. Do you, I guess, just in your opinion, think that is something he should consider? Would he be a good candidate for higher office?
Governor Pritzker is running for re-election as governor of the state of Illinois. That's what he's focused on. I'm focused on being his lieutenant governor. I do think it's really good for the people of Illinois that leaders of Illinois, that this leader of Illinois is considered somebody who could go on to run the nation. I mean, Illinois is the state most representative of the nation, and it's really exciting to see a governor who is considered for president and not for prison. So I think he would be excellent. Having said that, that's why I'm so excited he's running for re-election to continue the progress of the last 7 years, seven balanced budgets, credit upgrades, economic development all across the state of Illinois, additional investments in education, lowering the cost of healthcare. That's the kind of leadership that we need here. And I understand why people around the nation would like him to do that, but we're fortunate that he's ours.
Going a little bit more into your background, you were once executive director of the Democrat Party of Illinois. In 2018, when you held that role, you had a very successful election. There was the blue wave across the country, but you picked up a majority in the General Assembly, swept statewide offices. I guess what you learned from that experience that you're taking into this campaign, what do you bring from that that just shows you, I guess, how to successfully win big races?
Well, I think what the people of Illinois wanted in 2018, what they want now, is leadership that cares about them, that cares about working families, cares about the middle class, cares about the most vulnerable, is making their lives like life is difficult, but it can be easier when you have leaders who care about investing in the middle class, making healthcare more affordable, who understand everything right now is too damn expensive. How is it that we continue to create the jobs of the future, lower costs, things like the governor's done with capping the cost of insulin? And so those were the kind of races that we localized and ran around the state in 2018. We want to make sure that we keep moving Illinois forward. That, in some ways, is the exact race that we're running now. And it's more important than ever when you've got Republicans in Washington voting on a bill that's going to strip away health care from hundreds of thousands of Illinoisans, millions of Americans, take food out of the mouths of poor children, all to give tax breaks to the wealthy. Governor Pritzker represents a different type of leadership, and it was that type of leadership that we ran on in 2018, and it's the same type of leadership we're running on now in 2025.
Now, in that role, you were executive director under the former chair, Mike Madigan. Thinking, I guess, back to that time, how do you reflect on Madigan's leadership of the party now that he's been convicted of corruption charges in court? And do you just have any concerns that that relationship could be some sort of liability for the campaign in 2026?
Look, the a jury of Speaker Madigan's peers rendered a judgment. He is going to serve time for the things of which he was convicted and of which he is guilty. And I think it's important to take the message that not just voters, but now a jury has sent, which is to say, continue. Let's make Illinois the most ethical state in the nation, the best place to make sure that we can do business, to work, to live, to raise a family. It's why when I was running the clean energy bill on behalf of the governor, we led with ethics reform, ended the formula rate scheme that frankly was part of what got the speaker and others in trouble. So I think what's important is that judgment has been rendered. Now let's move forward. Anybody who has ideas about how we continue to make the state more ethical, we're going to meet them with an open hand and are going to be very interested in doing that. So let's focus on the jobs of the future, focus on making life more affordable, but let's do it in a way that continues to build the trust of taxpayers.
Yeah, you've seen state government from so many different angles as an elected official, as somebody in the administration. You've been a lobbyist for the last few years. What, I guess, do you take away from all those experiences on, is there anything more we can do on ethics reform?
Well, look, just to clarify, I worked at the University of Chicago. It's a nonprofit organization. We were working with our partners, the city colleges, to get a new health and life sciences employment program stood up on the South Side. So that's the only interaction I've had as a quote unquote lobbyist. Look, I think at the end of the day, continuing to do things that build trust in government is what's most important, making sure that people are disclosing any conflicts of interest, that you are making sure to step away from potential revolving doors. Those are always things we can continue to look at. There are a ton of groups that do really good work on this stuff. I'm starting to get back into this, so starting to read some of those proposals. But again, anyone who has a good idea on ethics reform, governor has always led with that. It's something I care about a great deal. You'll be met with an open hand and very interested in hearing about those proposals.
Going more into some policy priorities, Juliana Stratton has been a very aggressive leader on policy for the governor. She's pushed a lot of the big initiatives, as you know. What sort of ideas do you want to move forward if you're the lieutenant governor? What would you be pushing for as part of the Pritzker administration in a third term?
First of all, Juliana Stratton's been a friend for a long time. I talked to her actually earlier this week about doing the job and doing it well. Governor Pritzker said she's the best lieutenant governor we've ever had, and I agree, and very excited to see her on her next endeavor. For me, my number one thing, as I've said, and as the governor said, is how do we make life more affordable for Illinois' working families? How do we invest in not just the physical infrastructure as we did in rebuilding roads and bridges and our state universities, but also the human infrastructure? As AI is coming down the pike, as we have state universities that are continuing to need investment, how do we make sure that people, no matter where they live in the state of Illinois, can be prepared for the jobs of the future, whether that's through a trade school or through community college or through a university? So really focusing on making life more affordable, more abundant, more accessible for Illinoisans. That's the big thing that I'm going to focus on in partnership with the governor and his leadership.
You've led some of those really big initiatives that the governor got done in his first term, Rebuild Illinois, CEJA. Tell me just kind of your strategy for passing legislation, building coalitions, getting people on the same page to agree to some of these really transformative projects that the state has undertaken the last few years.
Yeah, the first thing you start with is what is the need and what is the vision, right? These are conversations that I have with the governor. What does success look like? And that's kind of always where we start. But also, what does the state of Illinois need? And with Rebuild Illinois, it was we had tons of roads and bridges in a state of disrepair. They were affecting commerce, the ability of trucks to get to and fro. They were causing people all across Illinois to bust an axle on roads with large potholes. So what was our need? And also, how do we then invest in our universities, invest in rebuilding our correctional facilities, invest in some of the projects around districts? So for me, it's always been how do you listen to anyone who has a good idea? And when we dealt with environmentalists, we dealt with labor, and I'm talking now about CEJA, we dealt with figuring out what we were going to do to transition downstate coal plants. And so there was a coal to solar program that was not originally something that we had contemplated, that a series of downstate and central Illinois legislators said, hey, this is a way to use this interconnection in a way that's going to create jobs. We also have to figure out, and we worked very hard on this, for communities that are reliant on those sort of fossil fuel industries, what's the transition plan look like for them and the property taxes that those things pay? And all of that was about listening to people, figuring out how it could work, how we could pay for it, all at the lowest possible cost to the ratepayer. So for me, it's build the biggest tent you possibly can, ask people for their ideas, and be willing to listen to them and change your mind when it turns out that something is different than you thought it was. That's how Governor Pritzker's always led. That's how he always directed me when I was deputy governor. That's what we'll do as partners in state government going forward.
On CEJA, there's been a lot of talk the last year or two about price increases for energy rates, really throughout the entire state, whether it's ComEd or Ameren territory. As we kind of, move towards this clean energy goal, what do you, I guess, think the state needs to be doing more of to make energy more affordable, while at the same time sticking to these goals that were outlined in CEJA?
Well, look, a big thing actually is not about the state itself. There's certainly always more we can do. And as we hear more about how to reduce the cost of projects while still making sure we keep, good labor standards and good connection, we have a real challenge at the federal level right now, where this big, ugly bill they're trying to pass in Washington is going to effectively destroy a lot of the progress that's been made across the country in renewable energy. Solar and wind are some of the cheapest, or in fact, might be the cheapest units of energy you can get right now. That isn't a decision we made on policy. That's the market making that decision. And so what's happening in Washington is going to make that a lot harder to do. And oh, by the way, China is building this stuff. So in terms of American and Illinois competitiveness, this is a really bad deal. But the second thing is the regional transmission authorities that allow us to connect those resources to the grid, they're really slow and they're not doing the work as well as they could be. And so the RTOs speeding up their process, Washington not making stuff harder are the things that make the biggest difference. But we're always open and always working with our Commerce Commission, with our power agency to figure out how we can continue to provide adequate resources, lowest possible rate to the ratepayer while meeting our clean energy goals. That's always the goal.
Yeah, sticking with affordability. Affordability is a big concern just across the economy with the way prices have increased the last few years. The governor has really made it, I think, one of his big messages, especially since the last election. He has said Democrats really do need to focus on affordability issues, communicating that to people. How do you do that, though? How do you do that in a governor's race where, these are macroeconomic concerns that aren't just in the state of Illinois? How do you say that you're going to actually be able to make a meaningful difference for Illinois residents on their economic concerns?
Yeah, I think about this a couple ways. I mean, first of all, one of the big expenditures for everybody is healthcare. So continuing to lower the cost of healthcare, making insurance companies do the right thing, doing things like capping the cost of insulin for seniors, which the governor already led an initiative on, along with Deputy Governor Andy Minar and others who worked on it. That is one way of doing that sort of stuff. So lower the cost of healthcare. Property taxes are a real problem across the state, and in part they're a problem because the state has not done its job in providing enough resources for public education, which drives a lot of property tax spending. The governor has put millions and millions, hundreds of millions of new dollars in education every single year to help drive down that burden. We do now need to work with our local governments to make sure those savings are being passed along. That's another way in which you touch people's pocketbooks directly. So if you work on healthcare, if you work on the cost of education, those are two really big ways that you can affect affordability in ways that people are going to feel. The governor also, by the way, eliminated the state grocery tax. So every time you go and need to pick up groceries to feed your family, you're now not being burdened by state government imposing an additional cost on you. People want to know that you understand what's going on in their lives, that you're working on their behalf every single day. And when you do things that they can see on their paycheck, in their pocketbook, that I think is how you inspire confidence. And that's something we can do as statewide elected officials.
You've been a state representative from Chicago. How do you get downstate people excited about you being on the ticket?
Well, the first thing I'd say is when I was in the House, as you mentioned, and chairman of the Committee on Economic Opportunity, my first ever hearing was at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. And it was about how, by the way, a bunch of kids from my district on the south side of Chicago were attending SIU because SIU made itself affordable for them, but also what that university meant for Carbondale. When I was working on the education funding reform back in 2017 with Will Davis and Andy Minar and Bob Pritchard, I was traveling all around the state of Illinois talking to folks in gymnasiums, at town halls. I'm going to do that again. I want to get downstate, want to meet people where they live. I actually am in central Illinois at least once a month for my service for the Illinois National Guard. So I love all of Illinois. I want to be in all of Illinois. I want to hear from people in all of Illinois. I will say, as a very food-focused person, I want to eat all across the state of Illinois. There's some great barbecue and other types of food around the state. So I'm really excited to get out, meet people where they live. And I think at the end of the day, we're all human. Somebody in Chicago and somebody in Alton have a lot more in common than we may think. And I want to make sure that we make those connections because representing the whole state, as I did as a state rep, as we did in things like Rebuild Illinois, where we were investing across the state in roads and bridges, that's the job. And I'm really excited to do it.
Yeah, tell me about that real quick before we wrap up. Your service in the Air National Guard. How did you get involved with that? What do you see as your role in that going forward if you were lieutenant governor? What sort of, I guess, example does that set for the people of Illinois that, and one of their elected officials is also partaking in this service?
Well, I joined the National Guard for two reasons. The first is my grandfather was one of my heroes. He really stepped into the void for me, only child of a single mom, and my grandfather really played some of that father figure for me. He was in the U.S. Army for a couple years in the Korean War. He always talked about his service, how it shaped him, what it meant to him, especially as an African American at that time. So I admired him greatly and was always interested. Second reason, though, is that the Department of Military Affairs reported up to me when I was a deputy governor, and I got to know the adjutant general and others really well. I saw the service of the National Guard during the historic flooding in 2019, and then, of course, during COVID-19. Men and women dropping everything to help make sure the people of Illinois could be safe, could get back to work. I really have enjoyed my time in the National Guard. I intend to continue to stay and to serve. It's certainly not great for my free time, but it's your time is the most precious thing that you have, and the ability to give my time in service of my state and my country is very important to me. And the courageous men and women who do this on a full-time basis and who are also drill status guardsmen like myself, to me, are the best of Illinois. And so I want to keep doing that because it's very meaningful to me.
All right, Christian, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to do it.